Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is James Caldwell, and I've been a forest ranger for 9 years now. People think it's a peaceful job. Walking through pretty woods, helping lost hikers, maybe fighting the odd forest fire. But out here in the Monongah National Forest, things get strange sometimes. Real strange. I became a ranger after my daddy died in a mine collapse. 3 generations of Caldwells had worked those coal mines, but I couldn't go back down there after what happened. The mountains called to me in a different way from above ground where I could breathe. My wife Ruth says I took the job to save people because I couldn't save him. Maybe she's right. We've got 2 little girls, Emma and Lucy, and when I tuck them in at night, I think about all the families I've helped find their way home. It was late October when the call came in. I was fixing a broken gate near the cranberry wilderness when my radio crackled to life. "James, you there?" It was dispatch. "Copy. Marie. What's up? Got a family missing up in the high country. Party of 5. Mom, Dad, 3 kids. Last seen 2 days ago heading into the wilderness area. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. 2 days was a long time, especially with winter coming early this year. The temperature had been dropping fast at night, sometimes down to 20 degrees. Ages on those kids, 8, 6, and 4. My heart squeezed tight. Emma was 6, Lucy was 4. I'm on my way. The drive up to the trailhead took me an hour on winding mountain roads. Frank Morrison, my partner, was already there loading his pack. Frank's been doing this for 20 years. He's seen it all. Missing hikers usually turn up cold and scared, but alive. Sometimes they don't turn up at all. "What do we know?" I asked, checking my gear. "Radio, first aid kit, emergency shelter, enough supplies for 3 days if needed." "Family names." "Peterson," Frank said, not looking up from his pack. "From Richmond. Dad's an accountant. Never been camping before this trip. Mom posted on social media about wanting to disconnect from technology and connect with nature." I winced. City folks didn't understand how fast things could go wrong up here. The Cranberry Wilderness wasn't some state park with marked trails and ranger stations. It was 15 miles of raw mountain country where you could disappear forever. "K9 unit coming?" I asked. "Should be here in an hour." But James, Frank's voice got quiet. "There's something weird about this one." "What do you mean?" "Park Service found their car yesterday. Keys still in it, windows down, like they just stepped away for a minute, but their camping permit says they plan to be out for 5 days. That didn't make sense. No family leaves their car unlocked in the middle of nowhere, especially not with kids. We started up the trail as the sun was getting low. The forest felt wrong somehow, too quiet. Usually you'd hear birds calling, squirrels chattering, something moving in the underbrush. But there was nothing. Just the sound of our boots on the rocky path and our breathing in the thin mountain air. "Frank, you hear that?" "Hear what?" "That's what I mean. Nothing. No birds, no insects, nothing." Frank stopped walking and listened. The silence stretched out like a heavy blanket. Even the wind had stopped blowing. "___, quote, __0, ___," he said, but his voice sounded uncertain. We hiked for 2 more hours before we found it, their campsite. But it wasn't what I expected. The tent was still standing, stakes driven deep into the ground. A pot sat on the cold remains of a campfire. And when I touched it, the metal was still warm. "That's impossible," Frank muttered. "They've been missing for 2 days." I knelt down next to the fire pit. The ashes were cold, but underneath them I could feel heat, like someone had built a fire on top of old coals that were still burning. "Frank, look at this." Around the campsite, pressed deep into the soft earth, were tracks. But they weren't human tracks. They were huge, at least 18 inches long, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. The stride length was impossible. Whatever made them had to be at least 9 feet tall. "Bear," Frank suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. I'd seen plenty of bear tracks. These weren't from any bear. The print was too long, too narrow, and bears don't walk upright for that distance. These tracks led away from the camp in a straight line, heading uphill toward the old, abandoned mine shafts. That's when we heard it. A scream echoed across the valley, high, desperate, and human. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off the rock walls and rolling through the trees. The sound went on and on, way longer than any human could scream. Frank and I looked at each other. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never heard anything like it. "That came from up the mountain," Frank said, pointing toward the dark line of trees above us. "We need to call this in," I said, reaching for my radio. Nothing but static. I tried different channels. Still nothing. We were completely cut off. The scream came again, closer this time. And underneath it, I swear I could hear something else. Something that sounded like a child crying. We left the Peterson family's campsite as the last light faded from the sky. Those impossible tracks led uphill through thick forest, and every instinct I had told me not to follow them. But somewhere up there, 3 kids might still be alive. Frank had his flashlight out, sweeping it back and forth across the trail. "James, these tracks, they're too deep. Whatever made them has to weigh at least 600 pounds. I shined my light on one of the prints. The earth was pressed down so hard it was like concrete. Around the edges, I could see where claws had scraped against rocks, leaving deep gouges in the stone. "Maybe it's carrying something heavy," I said. But even as I said it, I knew that didn't make sense. "Hello, Peterson family. This is the Park Service," Frank added. We pushed through the pine branches, following the sound. But when we broke into the clearing beyond, there was nothing there. Just empty forest and those same impossible tracks leading further up the mountain. Frank whispered. We both heard them. I felt cold sweat running down my back, despite the freezing air. The voices had been so clear, so real. A mother comforting her children, a father trying to stay brave, quote 12, quote I said, quote 13, quote. But deep down, I was starting to understand that something was very wrong here. The abandoned campsite with warm food, the tracks that couldn't belong to any animal I knew, the voices in the empty forest. None of it made sense. We climbed higher. The trees got thicker and the darkness pressed in around us like a living thing. Our flashlight beams seemed weak and useless, swallowed up by the night. That's when Frank stepped wrong. I heard him cry out behind me and turned to see him falling, his flashlight spinning away into the darkness. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up. "Frank!" I rushed to his side. He was conscious, but his face was twisted in pain. "My ankle!" he gasped. "I think it's broken." I checked him over with my flashlight. His right ankle was already swelling, and when he tried to move it, he went white with pain. "Okay, we're getting you out of here," I said, reaching for my radio again. Still nothing but static. We were on our own. "No." Frank grabbed my arm. "Those kids, James, you heard them. They're still up there. I'm not leaving you here alone. You have to. I can make it back to the campsite. Wait for the K9 unit. But those children..." He looked up toward the dark mountainside. "They don't have time." I knew he was right. Every hour those kids spent in this cold could be their last. But leaving Frank alone felt wrong. Take this. Frank pressed something into my hand. His emergency whistle. The kind that makes a sound so high and sharp it can be heard from miles. If you get in trouble, use it. I'll hear it and send help. I helped him stand and watched him limp slowly back down the trail, using a broken branch as a walking stick. Then I turned and followed those tracks deeper into the forest. The higher I climbed, the stranger things got. My compass needles spun wildly, pointing in different directions every few seconds. My watch showed times that couldn't be right, and the silence got deeper, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. After another mile, I found Frank's flashlight lying on the ground. I picked it up and noticed something that made my blood run cold. The metal casing was dented, like something with incredible strength had grabbed it and squeezed, but Frank had been right behind me. How had his flashlight gotten so far ahead? I shined both lights around the area and found more tracks, but this time they weren't the huge clawed prints I'd been following. These were human footprints, Frank's boots. They led away from where he'd fallen, but in the wrong direction. Instead of heading back down toward the campsite, they went uphill. That was impossible. Frank could barely walk, and he'd gone back down the mountain. I'd watched him go. Unless someone was wearing his boots. The scream came again, much closer now. It started low and human, then rose to a pitch that hurt my ears, and this time I was sure I heard words in it. Help me. The voice was Frank's. I ran toward the sound, crashing through underbrush and stumbling over rocks. The tracks led me to a narrow ravine with steep walls on both sides. At the bottom, barely visible in my flashlight beam, something moved. Frank. Frank, is that you? A shape down in the ravine turned toward my voice. In the pale light, I could see it was wearing Frank's ranger jacket and his distinctive red wool cap. James. The voice was weak, gasping. Help me. Something's wrong. Can't move my legs. I started down the steep slope, loose rocks sliding under my feet. But as I got closer, something made me stop. The shape at the bottom of the ravine was the right size, wearing the right clothes. But it wasn't moving right. The head turned too far, twisting almost all the way around to look at me. And when my flashlight beam hit its face, I saw that it wasn't Frank at all. It was something else wearing Frank's clothes. Something with yellow eyes that reflected my light, like an animal's, and a mouth full of teeth that were too long and too sharp. The thing that looked like Frank smiled at me and spoke in Frank's voice. Come down here, James. I'm hurt real bad. I scrambled backward up the slope as fast as I could, rocks cutting my hands, not caring about the noise I was making behind me. That terrible voice called out again, still sounding exactly like my partner. Don't leave me here, James. Please, it's so cold. I reached the top of the ravine and ran. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through the forest with no idea where I was going. All I knew was that something up here could steal voices, could wear a man's clothes, could pretend to be human, and somewhere in these dark woods. It had 3 children. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. When I finally stopped, gasping and shaking, I found myself in a small clearing surrounded by twisted oak trees. Their bark was torn and shredded, like something with massive claws had been using them to sharpen its weapons. The gouges in the wood were fresh. Whatever made them had been here recently. I tried to get my bearings, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed taller and more twisted than before, and shadows moved between them. Even though there was no wind, my flashlight beam felt weak and useless against the pressing darkness. That's when I heard the children crying. It was coming from deeper in the woods, the sound of kids who were scared and cold and calling for their parents. But after what I'd seen in the ravine, I didn't trust any sounds anymore. I moved toward the crying anyway. What choice did I have? The sound led me to an old mine haft, one of the abandoned coal mines that dotted these mountains like bullet holes. A wooden frame marked the entrance, but the boards were rotted and broken. The crying was coming from down inside. "Hello?" I called into the darkness. "Kids, are you down there?" "I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help." The crying stopped. Then a small voice answered, "Mister, is that really you?" It was a little boy, maybe 8 years old, the same age as my nephew, Tommy. "Yes, it's really me." "What's your name, son?" "Michael Peterson. I'm down here with my sisters. We're scared. Something took Mommy and Daddy." My heart pounded. This was real. This was one of the missing kids. "Okay, Michael, I'm coming down to get you. Are you hurt?" "No, sir. But we can't find the way out, and there's something else down here with us." I felt around the mine entrance until I found an old rope that miners had used years ago. It felt strong enough to hold my weight. I tied my spare flashlight to a loop on my belt and started down. The mine shaft was deeper than I'd expected. 20 feet, 30, 40. I kept going down into the earth. The walls were rough stone and timber, and water dripped somewhere in the darkness. Finally, my feet touched solid ground. I untied myself from the rope and looked around with my flashlight. The mine opened up into a larger chamber carved out of the rock, and there, huddled against the far wall, were 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, dirty and scared, but alive. "Michael!" I called out. The boy looked up. He had brown hair and freckles, and he was trying to be brave for his little sisters. "Are you really a ranger, mister?" "Yes. Am James Caldwell. I showed him my badge. I'm going to get you out of here." "The thing that took our parents," Michael whispered. "It can sound like them." It called to us in Mommy's voice, but when we went to look, she wasn't there. "Where are your parents now?" It took them deeper into the mine. We heard them screaming, but then it got quiet. Tears ran down his dirty face. "They're not coming back, are they?" I wanted to lie, to tell him everything would be okay. But this boy had been through enough. He deserved the truth. "I don't know," I said, "but I'm going to get you through somewhere safe." I was checking the kids for injuries when I heard it. Footsteps echoing from deeper in the mine. Slow, heavy footsteps that didn't sound human. Underscore, quote underscore 27 underscore, the youngest girl whispered. I turned off my flashlight and pulled the children behind some old mining equipment. In the darkness, we waited. The footsteps got closer, and with them came a sound I'll never forget. A low humming like someone singing a lullaby, but the tune was wrong somehow, with notes that hurt to hear. My flashlight beam caught it as it entered the chamber. It stood at least 12 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown fur that hung in matted clumps. Its arms were too long for its body, hanging almost to the ground, ending in hands with claws like kitchen knives. But the worst part was its face. It looked almost human, but stretched and wrong. Yellow eyes that glowed in the darkness, a mouth full of teeth that looked like they belonged on a shark. And when it spoke, its voice was perfectly human. "Michael, Sarah, Jenny, where are you, children? Mommy's here." The voice was gentle and loving, exactly what a mother would sound like calling for her lost babies. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed it was Mrs. Peterson herself. "Don't be afraid," quote 28. Quote, "Daddy and I have been looking everywhere for you." Come out now. We need to go home. Quote 29. Quote James Caldwell. Quote 30. Quote run. Quote 31. Quote, that thing, it's still up there, isn't it? Yes, it's still up there. He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. It knew our names. It knew Mommy's voice perfectly. How did it know? I don't know, son. Will it come looking for us? You haven't been sleeping, she said, sitting down across from me. I'm fine. No, you're not. Emma asked me yesterday why Daddy looks scared all the time now. She reached across and took my hand. What really happened up there, James? I looked at my wife. This good woman who'd married a miner son and supported his crazy dream of protecting the forest. I thought about Emma and Lucy sleeping upstairs, safe in their beds. How could I tell her that something ancient and hungry lived in the mountains we called home? There are things in these woods, Ruth. Things that don't belong in any nature book. She studied my face for a long moment. Your grandmother used to tell stories about the old mountains, about things that were here before the Cherokee, before anyone. She called them the first hungry. You never told me that, because I thought they were just stories. Ruth squeezed my hand, but I see in your eyes what Grandma saw in hers, the knowledge that some stories are true. That night, I made a decision. I requested a transfer to the main office in Charleston. Desk work. No more mountain patrols. No more search and rescue. Ruth thought it was because of what happened to Frank, and I let her believe that. But the real reason was the dreams. Every night I heard that thing calling to me in Frank's voice. Every night I saw those yellow eyes watching my family's house from the tree-ine. And every morning I checked our windows and doors, looking for signs that something had tried to get in. On my last day in the field, I drove back up to the Cranberry Wilderness one more time. I told myself I was checking the area, making sure it was safe for other rangers. Really, I needed to know if it was still there. I hiked to the Peterson family's old campsite. Everything had been cleaned up, but those massive tracks were still pressed into the earth. They led away from the camp and up toward the mine, just like before. I followed them. At the mine entrance, I found something that made my blood freeze. Bones arranged in careful patterns around the shaft opening. Human bones, some old and weathered, others still fresh. Among them, I recognized pieces of Frank's equipment. His radio cracked and broken, his ranger hat torn and bloody, and carved into a nearby tree gouged deep into the bark with claws were initials and dates going back over 100 years. Every few years, new marks appeared. Names of people who disappeared in these mountains remembered only by the thing that had taken them. At the bottom of the list, in fresh cuts that still wept tree sap, I saw FM 1 1963 and HP and LP 1 1963. Frank Morrison, Harold Peterson, and Linda Peterson. The creature had marked its territory with the names of its victims. It was keeping score. I heard movement in the forest behind me and turned to see it, watching from the shadows between the trees. It was smaller than I remembered, maybe only 10 feet tall instead of 12. But those yellow eyes were the same. And when it smiled, I saw the same shark teeth. "Hello, James," it said in Frank's voice. "I found tracks, just like you. Where is he? Where's my boy?" The words came from directly in front of me, but there was nothing there, just empty air above the disturbed earth. Every hair on my body stood up. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees and my flashlight flickered. "Who's there? Help me find him, help me find my boy. How'd it go last night?" he asked. I told him about the footprints, the clearing, and the bones. I left out the part about the woman in white. Tom was a practical man. and I needed to stay credible if I was going to get help with this. Bones, huh? Tom scratched his beard. Not the first time. We've been finding Civil War remains in this area for decades, usually after heavy rains wash away soil. Have you ever heard stories about a crying woman? Local legends or ghost stories? Tom's expression changed. He sat down his coffee and looked at me seriously. Patricia, there are things in these mountains that go back a long way. Old-timers used to talk about Sarah Whitmore, local woman from the 1860s whose son went off to fight with the Confederates. Story goes that he came home wounded and died somewhere in these woods. She spent years looking for his body, walking the mountains every night until she died of grief. That's just a story, right? Maybe. But rangers have been reporting strange things in this area for decades. Temperature drops, equipment failures, voices in the woods. Most folks don't talk about it because they don't want to sound crazy. I spent the rest of the day researching. The park has historical records going back to its establishment in 1935, and I found references to Sarah Whitmore in several documents. She was real, all right. Lost her husband in the early days of the war. Then her only son came home wounded from a battle that wasn't even officially recorded. According to the records, Sarah searched the mountains for months before being found dead near Old Rag Mountain in 1863. Exposure and exhaustion, the report said. But there were other details that made me uncomfortable. Witnesses said she'd been seen walking the same area night after night, calling for her son, even after she should have been too weak to leave her bed. That evening, I went back to Lieberlos Trail. This time I brought backup batteries, extra radio equipment, and a camera. If I was going crazy, I wanted evidence. If I wasn't going crazy, I wanted evidence for that, too. The temperature drop happened again, right at the same spot as the night before. My breath steamed in the air, and the forest went silent. But this time, I was ready for it. I followed the footprints again, and they led to the same clearing. But tonight there were more bones visible in the disturbed earth, pieces of uniform, buttons, and what looked like personal effects scattered around. "Sarah!" I called out. "Sarah Whitmore." The crying started immediately, closer this time. "I know you're looking for your son. I want to help." The woman appeared at the edge of the clearing, clearer than before. This time I could see details, the torn white dress that might have been a nightgown, bare feet that didn't quite touch the ground, and that terrible face with its empty eye sockets. "You can see me," she said, her voice filled with wonder and hope. "Yes, I can see you. Tell me about your son, James." His name was James Whitmore. He came home from the fighting with a hole in his side, bleeding inside. I tried to nurse him, but he was so weak. One morning, he was gone. Just gone. I've been looking for him ever since. As she spoke, I began to understand. This wasn't just a ghost story. This was a mother's love that had refused to accept death, that had somehow continued beyond the grave. "Sarah, how long have you been looking? Days? Weeks? I lose track of time. But I'll find him. A mother always finds her child." She didn't know she was dead. Didn't understand that more than a century had passed. That's when I felt it. A crushing weight of sadness that came from outside myself. Images flashed in my mind. A young soldier stumbling through dark woods, bleeding, calling for his mother. The boy collapsing near a hidden cave. His mother searching frantically, growing weaker each day until she died, still calling his name. The emotional assault was overwhelming. I felt every moment of Sarah's grief, every night of searching, every dawn that brought no answers. It was like drowning in someone else's sorrow. But worse than that, the sadness triggered my own memories. The children from the hospital fire flooded back. The ones I couldn't reach in time. The ones who called for their mothers as the smoke took them. I fell to my knees in the clearing, sobbing uncontrollably. Sarah's grief had found the crack in my own heart and pried it wide open. "You understand," Sarah said, moving closer. "You know what it's like to lose them." I forced myself to look up at her. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about James, about where he might be." But before I could continue, my vision blurred, and I saw something else, a cave opening, hidden by fallen rocks and overgrown with vines. Inside, the remains of a young soldier still wearing pieces of his Confederate uniform. The vision was so clear, I knew exactly where to find it. The cave was exactly where the vision had shown me, about half a mile north of the clearing. Hidden behind what looked like a natural rock fall. In daylight, you'd walk right past it. But with Sarah's memories guiding me, I could see where the opening had been partially concealed by debris. I came back the next morning with proper caving equipment, ropes, a helmet with a headlamp, and emergency gear. If James Whitmore's remains were really in there, I owed it to both him and his mother to handle this properly. The opening was barely wide enough for one person to crawl through. Inside, the cave expanded into a natural chamber about the size of a small room. My headlamp picked out details that confirmed what I'd seen in the vision. Human remains lay against the far wall, still partially clothed in the rotted remnants of a Confederate uniform. A water-stained leather pouch nearby contained papers that had somehow survived the decades. When I carefully opened it, I found a letter addressed to my dearest mother in fading ink. The letter was never finished. It described James's wound, his struggle to make it home, and his certainty that he was dying. The last line read, "Tell Mother I tried to make it home to her. Tell her I—" That's where it ended. I sat in that cave for a long time, thinking about Sarah Whitmore, searching these mountains for over a century, driven by love that couldn't accept loss. Thinking about my own inability to let go of the children I'd failed to save. That night, I went back to the clearing with a plan. Sarah appeared as soon as I called her name, but this time she looked different, more solid, more present. The grief was changing her, making her stronger and more dangerous. "I know where James is," I told her. "Where?" The word came out as almost a scream. "I found his body, Sarah. He's been dead since 1863, just like you have." The temperature in the clearing plummeted. Frost began forming on the trees around us. No, I'm not dead. I'm looking for my son. I'm taking care of him. Sarah, look at yourself. Look at your hands." She held up her arms, and in my flashlight beam we could both see through them to the trees behind. "You died searching for him. You both died, but you can't let go." The wailing that came from her then was inhuman. It was the sound of a century of denied grief finally breaking free. The trees around us began to bend away from the clearing, and I felt that crushing sadness again, but stronger this time. This was her power. She fed on grief, on the inability to accept loss, and I realized that's why she had appeared to me specifically. I was carrying my own unresolved grief, and it had called to her. "Thank you. Thank you for bringing him home," he said. Sarah stood and embraced him, and for a moment they were both solid, both real, both free. "Quote 53, she said. Quote 54. They both turned to me and Sarah smiled. It was the first time I'd seen her face without pain. "Take care of yourself, Patricia," she said. "And forgive yourself. Those children you lost, that wasn't your fault. Sometimes people die despite our best efforts. Sometimes love means accepting that." The light grew brighter, and then they were gone. The formal burial took place 3 days later. Tom Bradley, the park historian, and I held a simple ceremony in the park cemetery. We placed both sets of remains together under a single headstone that read, Sarah Whitmore, 1823, 1863, and James Whitmore, 1841, 1863, reunited at last. The crying stopped after that. No more reports of a woman in white near Liberlos Trail. No more temperature drops or equipment failures in that area. The forest returned to normal. But I didn't. Meeting Sarah Whitmore changed something fundamental in me. She'd shown me that grief, when we can't let it go, becomes its own kind of prison. For her, it had lasted over a century. For me, it had been 6 years. But it was just as real. I started talking to someone about the hospital fire, a counselor in town who specialized in what they now call post-traumatic stress. It helped to finally say out loud that I couldn't save everyone, that some losses are beyond our control. 6 months later, I applied for a transfer to the park's visitor services division. I wanted to help people again, but in a different way. The park started a grief counseling program for families who'd lost loved ones in hiking accidents or other tragedies. Turned out there was a need for someone who understood both loss and healing. I still work the mountains sometimes, but not alone anymore. And when new rangers ask about the strange reports they sometimes get, voices in the woods, unexplained cold spots, equipment failures, I tell them to take every call seriously. You never know when someone, living or dead, might really need help. The mountains keep their secrets, but they also keep their promises. Sarah Whitmore got her son back. I got my peace back. And somewhere in the valleys of Shenandoah, 2 souls who were lost for far too long finally found their way home. Sometimes late at night when I'm doing paperwork in the ranger station, I think I can still hear the echo of that golden light. It reminds me that love is stronger than death, but also that true love sometimes means letting go. That's the lesson Sarah Whitmore taught me in the mountains of Virginia in the spring of 1975, when I learned that helping the dead sometimes means helping the living learn to grieve. My name is Luther McGrady, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 22 years. I've seen bear attacks, stupid tourists, and more dead bodies than I care to count. But nothing in all my years prepared me for what happened in Moonshine Hollow that August. People always ask me why I became a ranger after spending half my youth running moonshine through these same mountains. Truth is, the mountains never let you go. Once they get in your blood, you're stuck. My daddy ran shine. His daddy before him. When I met my Sarah, she made me choose between the bottle and her. Wasn't much of a choice. That was back in '35. Sarah died of cancer 3 years ago. Now it's just me and my boy Bobby, who's 17 and thinks he wants to follow in my footsteps. I keep telling him there's better ways to make a living, but these mountains call to the McGrady blood. The morning it all started was hotter than the devil's kitchen. August in the Smokies can cook a man alive, but this was different. Even the birds weren't singing. That should have been my first warning. I was checking my gear in the ranger station when Sheriff Davies called. 3 hikers had gone missing near Cataract Falls. City folks from Atlanta been overdue for 2 days. Their car was still parked at the trailhead with a cooler full of warm beer and sandwiches going bad in the heat. "Luther, I need you to head up there," Davies said over the crackling radio. "You know that country better than anybody." He was right. I'd run shine through every hollow and creek in that area, knew every trail, every cave, every place a man could hide a still or lose himself forever. The Cataract Falls area was tricky. Lots of old moonshine operations back in there. Some going back to my granddaddy's time. I loaded my pack with the usual gear: water, first aid kit, rope, my 30-06 rifle. In these mountains, you never knew what you might run into. Bears were common, but we'd had reports of wild boar moving down from Tennessee. Nasty creatures that could tear a man apart. The hike to Cataract Falls normally took 2 hours, but I was making good time. The heat was murder, though. By the time I reached the falls, my shirt was soaked through. The waterfall was running lower than I'd ever seen it, just a thin trickle over the rocks. That's when I found the first sign something was wrong. There was an old still site about a quarter mile from the falls. Been abandoned since Prohibition ended, but the stone foundation was still there. I'd checked it many times over the years, made sure no one was trying to start up operations again. What I found made my blood run cold. The whole site was destroyed. Not torn down, destroyed. The old copper pipes that had been left behind were twisted into impossible shapes, like someone had heated them up and bent them with their bare hands. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the heat. Even in the shade of the year trees, the air around that old still was hot enough to make me dizzy. My compass needle was spinning like a top, and when I touched my rifle barrel, it was so hot I jerked my hand back with a curse. The trees around the site were wrong, too. Leaves brown and curled, bark blackened like they'd been in a fire. But there hadn't been any fire. No ash, no smell of smoke, just heat and dead plants and metal twisted into shapes that hurt to look at. I called it in on my radio, but all I got was static. That's when I found the first piece of the missing hikers, a belt buckle melted into the shape of a teardrop. Next to it, 3 bones charred black as coal. I should have headed back right then. Should have called for backup, gotten the hell out of that hollow. But I had a job to do, and somewhere up there people might still be alive. I followed what looked like a trail deeper into the woods. It wasn't a real trail, just bent grass and broken branches that might have been made by someone stumbling through in a panic. Every step I took, the air got hotter and thicker. My granddaddy used to tell stories about this place, called it cursed ground, said the Cherokee knew to stay away. Something about a fire devil that lived deep in the earth. Only came up when there was greed and violence in the air. I'd always figured it was just mountain talk. The kind of stories old folks told to keep kids from wandering too far. I wasn't so sure anymore. The sound hit me first, a metallic screeching that seemed to come from everywhere at once, like someone was dragging a rusty chain across a blackboard. It made my teeth ache and sent shivers down my spine despite the heat. Then I smelled it. Sulfur, thick and choking, mixed with something else, something that smelled like burned meat. I found the second hiker in a clearing about 50 yards ahead, or what was left of him. He was sitting against a tree, looking almost peaceful, except his hiking boots had melted around his feet, and his camera was a lump of twisted plastic hanging around his neck. The tree behind him was blackened and dead, its bark cracked and oozing sap that glowed faintly red. But the man wasn't burned, not a mark on him. He just sat there with his eyes closed like he'd decided to take a nap and never woke up. I checked for a pulse knowing I wouldn't find one. His skin was cold despite the heat all around us. When I touched his shoulder, his shirt crumbled to ash. That's when I heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps coming through the trees. Too heavy to be human, too regular to be an animal. I grabbed my rifle and tried to sight on the sound, but the heat was making everything shimmer like a mirage. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of something that shouldn't exist. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, and shaped like a man, but wrong in every way. Fire danced around it like a living thing, not burning it, but part of it. Its eyes glowed red as coals, and when it moved, the very air bent around it with heat. The fire devil, just like Granddaddy's stories. It saw me looking and smiled. When it smiled, the temperature shot up another 20 degrees. The barrel of my rifle started glowing cherry red, and I had to drop it before it burned my hands. The thing laughed, a sound like metal breaking, and vanished back into the trees. I ran, crashed through branches, and stumbled over roots, not caring about the noise I was making. Just had to get away from that clearing, away from the heat and the smell of sulfur and the memory of those glowing red eyes. I made it maybe 100 yards before I tripped over something soft. The third hiker was a woman, young, maybe 25. She was alive but barely conscious, mumbling something about fire and metal and a devil in the woods. Her hiking gear was melted and twisted, but she didn't have a mark on her. I got her up and half-carried her toward what I hoped was the way out. She kept talking, not making much sense, but what she said made my blood run cold. "It's making something," she whispered down in the deep places. "Making something from all the metal, all the greed and hate from the old days. It's almost finished." We made it back to the ranger station just as the sun was setting. The woman was taken to the hospital, but the doctors said there was nothing wrong with her except exhaustion and dehydration. She wouldn't talk about what happened in the woods, just stared at the wall and jumped every time someone dropped something metal. I should have let it go. Should have marked the area as dangerous and stayed away. But people were dead, and something in those woods was killing them. And I had the sinking feeling it wasn't done. The federal agent showed up 2 days later. Name was Patterson, ATF, investigating reports of illegal distilling in the national forest, he said, shaking my hand with a grip that tried too hard. I told him what I'd found. The twisted copper pipes, the destroyed still site. Didn't mention the fire devil or the dead hikers. Figured he'd think I was crazy. "I need you to guide me back there," Patterson said. "We've been tracking a major operation somewhere in these mountains. This could be the break we need." I tried to talk him out of it, told him the area was dangerous, maybe contaminated with some kind of chemical spill. But federal agents don't listen to mountain rangers, especially ones with a moonshining past. We set out at first light. I brought extra water and my backup rifle, a bolt action that might hold up better to the heat. Patterson carried enough gear for a week in the wilderness, and a pistol that looked like it had never been fired. The hike up was worse this time. The heat started hitting us while we were still a mile away from the falls. By the time we reached the destroyed still site, Patterson was red-faced and dripping sweat. "Jesus," he said, looking at the twisted metal. "What could do something like this?" I was about to answer when we heard it, the metallic screeching louder this time, coming from deeper in the woods. But now there was something else mixed in with it, a rhythmic pounding like hammer on anvil. "Someone's working," Patterson said, pulling out his pistol. "Come on." We followed the sound through the dead trees. The farther we went, the hotter it got, and the louder the hammering became. Whatever was making that noise was big and working hard. We found it in a natural bowl in the mountainside, a place I'd never seen before, despite knowing these woods for 40 years. Steam rose from cracks in the ground, and the air shimmered with heat so intense it was hard to breathe. In the center of the bowl was a workshop from hell. Twisted metal structures rose from the ground like impossible sculptures. Anvils made from melted copper pipes, hammers forged from old steel parts, tongs crafted from hiking gear and camping equipment. Everything glowed with its own red light, and the heat coming off it would have melted skin. And working at the largest anvil, shaping something with blows that shook the ground, was the fire devil. Up close, it was even more terrible. 9 feet tall and built like a blacksmith, muscles like coiled steel under skin that glowed like embers. Its hair was actual flames, dancing and crackling as it worked. When it hammered, sparks flew like shooting stars. It was making something long and sharp and beautiful in the way that dangerous things can be beautiful. A blade of some kind, but not like any weapon I'd ever seen. It seemed to be alive, pulsing with its own light. Patterson raised his pistol. "Federal agent, you're under arrest." The fire devil looked up and smiled. The temperature shot up so fast that Patterson's gun barrel started glowing. He screamed and dropped it, clutching his burned hand. The creature laughed and went back to its work. But now it was watching us, those red eyes never leaving our faces as it hammered away at its impossible weapon. "Run," I whispered to Patterson. We didn't make it far. The fire devil finished whatever it was making and came after us. Not running, just walking with those long, heavy steps. But every step it took, the ground behind it cracked and glowed. Trees burst into flame as it passed. The very air caught fire. Patterson stumbled and fell. When I turned to help him, I saw why. His badge had melted. The metal had gotten so hot it burned right through his shirt and into his chest. He was dead before he hit the ground. A look of surprised pain frozen on his face. I kept running until I couldn't run anymore, then hid in a cave I remembered from my moonshining days. Waited until the sun went down and the terrible heat faded from the air. When I finally made it back to the station, I called in Patterson's death as a hiking accident. Didn't see much point in trying to explain the truth. But I couldn't stop thinking about that weapon the fire devil was making, and about what my granddaddy used to say about the old feuds, the violence and greed that had soaked these mountains in blood. The devil was getting ready for something, and I had the feeling I knew what it was. I spent 3 days researching in the county library, digging through old newspapers and Cherokee tribal records. What I found made my hands shake. Back in 1922, there had been a war in Moonshine Hollow. 3 families fighting over territory and markets, killing each other over copper pipes and corn mash. The McCready clan, the Hutchkins family, and the Cherokee, who'd been running shine through those mountains for longer than anyone could remember. It ended when old Ezra McCready burned down a still with 2 Cherokee brothers inside. Before he died, one of them, a medicine man named Joseph Crow Feather, put a curse on the hollow. Said he was calling up something from the deep places, something that would punish greed and violence wherever it found it. The killing stopped after that, but not because people came to their senses. They stopped because something started hunting them in the woods. 7 men died over the next month, all found burned but not touched by fire. The survivors fled, and no one went back to Moonshine Hollow for 20 years. Until now, I found Joseph Crow Feather's great-grandson working at a gas station on the reservation. Old man named Thomas, maybe 70, with hands scarred from a lifetime of metal work. "My great-grandfather was a fool," he said when I told him what I'd found in the woods. "Thought he could control the fire devil, use it to get justice for his people. But devils don't care about justice. They only care about feeding." He told me the rest of the story, how Joseph Crow Feather had used the old rituals to call something up from the earth, something that fed on violence and hatred, how it had grown stronger with every death, every act of greed and rage in those mountains. "It's been sleeping," Thomas said, "waiting for enough anger and violence to wake it up again. Your federal agent, your missing hikers. They disturbed its rest. Now, it's hungry." He gave me what I needed to stop it. Sacred water from a spring that had never been touched by metal. Clay from the deepest part of the mountain, blessed by his ancestors. And words, Cherokee words that meant Quote 65? Quote 66? He warned me. The devil will fight, and you might not survive. I knew he was right, but I also knew I couldn't let that thing loose in the world. Too many people would die. I went back to Moonshine Hollow that night, carrying my grandfather's old lantern and a backpack full of sacred water and blessed clay. The heat hit me before I was halfway there, and by the time I reached the devil's workshop, the air was like breathing fire. The fire devil was waiting for me. It had finished its weapon, a sword that seemed to be made of crystallized flame, beautiful and terrible. When it saw me, it raised the blade and laughed. "Come to die like the others?" it said, and its voice was like molten metal. "Come to feed the fire." I didn't answer, just started spreading the sacred water in a circle around the workshop. Where the water touched the ground, steam rose, and the red glow faded. The fire devil snarled and came at me with its impossible sword. I rolled aside and kept pouring water, racing to complete the circle before it could stop me. The blade missed me by inches, cutting through the air with a sound like screaming. Where it touched the ground, the earth cracked and bled fire. I made it 3/4 of the way around before the devil caught me. Its hand closed around my throat, burning through my shirt and into my skin. The pain was beyond anything I'd ever felt, but I held on to the sacred water and kept pouring. You cannot stop what has already begun. The fire devil hissed. The earth remembers the violence, the greed. It feeds me, makes me strong. But I was remembering something too. Something my Cherokee friends had taught me about these mountains. They weren't just made of rock and soil, they were made of water too. Deep springs that had run pure since the world was young. I grabbed the blessed clay with my free hand and smeared it on the devil's arm. It screamed and let me go, but the damage was done. Its touch had burned me to the bone. With my last strength, I completed the circle and spoke the Cherokee words Thomas had taught me. The effect was immediate. The sacred water began to glow with its own light, cool and clean. The fire devil's workshop started to crumble, its impossible metal sculptures melting back into the earth. The creature itself was changing, too, its flames guttering like candles in the wind. "This is not over," it snarled. "Violence calls to violence. Greed calls to greed. I will return when the earth is ready to feed me again." But it was fading, sinking back into the cracks in the ground. The terrible heat was lifting, replaced by the cool mountain air I remembered from my childhood. I collapsed next to the dying fires. My burned arm cradled against my chest. The pain was incredible, but I was alive, and the fire devil was gone for now. They had to airlift me to the hospital in Knoxville. Third-degree burns on my arm and chest, smoke inhalation, severe dehydration. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive. I spent 6 weeks in that hospital bed thinking about what had happened in Moonshine Hollow, about the price of violence and greed and the things that sleep in the deep places of the world waiting for us to wake them up. My boy Bobby visited every day, brought me books and magazines, told me about his plans to go to college instead of becoming a ranger. Smart kid. Maybe the McGrady family could finally break free of these mountains. When I finally got out, I found that the Park Service had designated the entire Cataract Falls area as protected wilderness. No camping, no hiking, no metal of any kind allowed. They said it was to protect endangered species, but I knew better. Thomas Crow Feather helped me perform a cleansing ceremony at the entrance to the hollow. Blessed the boundaries, asked the mountain spirits to keep watch. It wouldn't stop the fire devil forever, but it might keep it sleeping for another generation or two. I retired from the ranger service that fall. Couldn't use my right arm well enough to do the job, and the nightmares made it hard to sleep. Started working at a hardware store in town, teaching city folks about mountain survival. But sometimes on hot August nights when the air is still and heavy, I drive out to the edge of the hollow and listen, just to make sure it's still quiet down there in the deep places. Because I know the truth now. The fire devil was right about one thing. Violence calls to violence. Greed calls to greed. And these mountains have seen plenty of both over the years. The devil is sleeping now, but it's still there, waiting for the next time someone gets greedy enough, angry enough, violent enough to wake it up. When that happens, and it will happen because that's just human nature, someone will have to go down into Moonshine Hollow and put it back to sleep again. I just hope it won't be my boy, Bobby. My name is Luther McGrady, and I've seen the fire devil with my own eyes. I've felt its burning touch and heard its voice like molten metal. I know what sleeps in the deep places of these mountains, and I know it's not done with us yet. Not by a long shot. My name is Marcus Flintridge, and I've been a park ranger for 11 years. I've seen bears tear apart campsites, tracked poachers through mountain storms, and pulled bodies from ravines that would make your stomach turn. But nothing in my training prepared me for what happened in November of 1984, deep in Virginia's Jefferson National Forest. I was 33 then, working alone in the Mount Pleasant area. Budget cuts meant no backup for miles, just me and my radio in country so thick with rhododendron you could hide a school bus in there. The mountains were my office, and I knew every ridge, every creek, every game trail like the back of my hand. That November was warm for the altitude. The leaves had fallen, but the air still held summer's heat during the day. Deer season was open, which meant I spent most of my time checking licenses and making sure hunters weren't shooting does with fawns. It was honest work, important work, even if it didn't pay much after my divorce. The call came in on a Tuesday morning while I was checking bear traps. Someone had been killing cattle down in the valley, and the local farmers were getting antsy. The sheriff figured it was a rogue bear, maybe one that had lost its fear of humans. That happened sometimes when tourists fed them, turned wild animals into beggars. Then when winter came and the handout stopped, they'd get desperate. Flintage, you copy. The radio crackled to life as I was examining tracks near Jennings Creek. Go ahead. Dispatch. Got another cattle killing. Henderson Farm about 3 miles south of your position. Sheriff wants you to take a look. I sighed and shouldered my pack. Henderson was a good guy. Ran a small operation with maybe 30 head of cattle. If something was picking off his livestock, it could put him under. The hike down took me through some of the prettiest country in Virginia. Mountain laurel grew thick on the slopes, and the creek ran clear and cold over smooth stones. I'd brought my 10-year-old daughter Sarah here just last weekend. She loved throwing rocks in the water while I checked the fish population. Simple moments like that were about all that kept me sane some days. Henderson met me at the fence line. He was pale, hat in his hands, looking like he'd seen something that shook him bad. Underscore, quote, underscore 68, underscore. He said before I could even say hello. Whatever did this, it ain't right. I've heard that kind of talk before from farmers who lost stock. Grief makes people see things that aren't there. Turn a normal predator attack into something mysterious. But Henderson was solid, not the type to spook easy. The cow was a young Holstein, maybe 800 pounds. She lay on her side near the tree line, and at first glance it looked like a normal bear kill. But as I got closer, something made my skin crawl. The wounds were too clean, too precise. Bears are messy killers. They use brute force, tear, and rip until their prey stops moving. This cow had been killed with surgical precision. A single bite to the throat, deep enough to hit the main artery, clean enough to drop her instantly. "When did you find her?" I asked, kneeling beside the carcass. This morning around 6. She was fine yesterday evening when I brought the herd in. I walked around the body, taking photos and notes. The grass around her was barely disturbed. No signs of a struggle, no gouges in the earth from hooves kicking in panic. It was like she'd just laid down and died. Then I found the tracks. They started at the wood line and approached the cow in a straight line. Bear tracks, definitely, but something was off. The front paws showed claw marks like normal. But there were other impressions in the soft earth. Marks that looked almost like thumbs. I'd spent 2 tours in Vietnam tracking Viet Cong through jungle that would swallow you whole. I knew what human prints looked like, and I knew bear sign better than most. These were something in between. "Henderson," I called. "You've been having any trouble with poachers? Anyone seen strangers in the area?" He shook his head. "Not since deer season opened, and even then most folks stick to the North Ridge. This is too close to my property line." I followed the tracks back into the forest. They led through thick undergrowth, past fallen logs and around massive oak trees. The prints stayed clear in the soft soil, and I could see where the creature had walked upright in some places, dropped to all fours in others. About a quarter mile from the kill site, the tracks stopped at a creek. The water ran shallow here, maybe ankle deep, flowing over a bed of smooth river stones. I waded across and spent an hour searching the far bank, but found nothing. Whatever had killed Henderson's cow had vanished like smoke. I made camp that night near the creek, hoping whatever it was might come back. The forest settled into its evening rhythm around me. Owls called from the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a fox barked. Normal sounds that should have been comforting. But as the hours passed, I noticed something wrong. The sounds were too distant, too far from where I sat. It was like every animal in the immediate area had moved away, leaving a pocket of silence around my small fire. I'd felt this before in Vietnam, right before an ambush. The jungle would go quiet, and you'd know something was watching, waiting, deciding whether you were worth the trouble. Around midnight, I heard something moving in the brush across the creek. Slow, deliberate steps that didn't match any animal I knew. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the water, but saw only trees and shadows. Then came a sound I'll never forget, low and rumbling like a bear's huff, but with something else underneath it. Something that almost sounded like words. I sat there until dawn with my rifle across my knees, listening to that thing pace back and forth just outside my light. When morning came, I found fresh tracks in the mud by the creek bank. They were bigger than the ones from the day before. The tracks by the creek measured 13 inches long and 8 inches wide. I'd seen Kodiak bear prints in Alaska that were smaller, but size wasn't what made my hand shake as I took measurements. These prints showed clear thumb impressions on both front paws, and the spacing suggested the creature had been walking mostly upright. I radioed Dr. Jenny Morrison, the wildlife biologist who worked with our department. If anyone could make sense of this, it was her. Jenny had studied predator behavior for 15 years and knew more about black bears than anyone in the state. "Marcus, you're sure about these measurements?" Her voice crackled through the radio static. "Positive. I've got photos and plaster casts. Jenny, there's something else. The cattle kill was too clean. No struggle, no defensive wounds on the cow. Whatever did this knew exactly where to bite." A long pause. "I'll be there this afternoon. Don't approach if you see it again. A bear that size could take your head off without trying." I spent the morning following the creek upstream, looking for more sign. The creature had definitely been in the water, but the rocky bottom made tracking impossible. About a mile up from my camp, I found something that stopped me cold. Someone had built a shelter in a grove of pine trees, not a human shelter. This looked like a combination of bear den and primitive hut. Logs had been dragged into position and arranged with purpose. Smaller branches were woven between them, creating walls. The entrance faced downstream, positioned to watch the creek. Inside the shelter, I found things that made my Vietnam training kick in hard. Someone had been collecting items from the forest and beyond. Hunting knives, arranged by size. A Park Service radio that had gone missing last month. Pieces of camping gear all clean and organized like a trophy collection. But it was the bones that really got to me. They were laid out in patterns on the shelter floor. Deer bones, cow bones, and others I couldn't identify. Some had been carved with crude tools shaped into points and edges. This wasn't random animal behavior. Someone or something was making weapons. I backed out of the shelter slowly, keeping my rifle ready. Whatever was living here had intelligence, patience, and access to human tools. That combination scared me more than any bear I'd ever faced. Jenny arrived that afternoon with a truck full of equipment. She was small and tough, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail, and eyes that missed nothing. We'd worked together on 3 previous bear problems, and I trusted her judgment completely. "Show me everything," she said, without preamble. We hiked to the kill site first. Jenny examined the cow carcass with professional detachment, taking samples and measurements. She spent a long time studying the bite patterns, shaking her head occasionally. The teeth marks are consistent with a large black bear. "But the technique is all wrong," she said finally. "Bears kill by overpowering their prey." This animal thought about where to bite for maximum effect. The tracks puzzled her even more. She made her own casts and took dozens of photos, muttering to herself as she worked. "Marcus, I need to see this shelter you found." The hike upstream was quiet. Too quiet. I kept checking our back trail but saw nothing following us. Still, the feeling of being watched never went away. Jenny's reaction to the shelter was everything I'd expected. She stood frozen at the entrance for a full minute, then slowly entered and began documenting everything with her camera. "This is impossible," she whispered. "The tool use, the organization, the collection behavior. No bear does this." "Hell, most primates don't show this level of planning." "That wasn't a bear," she said quietly. "No, it wasn't." "Then what the hell was it?" I didn't have an answer. But as we hiked back to the trucks by flashlight, I kept thinking about those intelligent eyes. Something was living in these mountains that understood humans, maybe better than we understood ourselves. And it was getting bolder. The next morning, Henderson called to report another dead cow. This one had been taken from a pasture less than a quarter-mile from his house. The kill was identical to the first, precise, efficient, surgical, but this time the creature had left a message. Arranged on the cow's flank were a dozen stones placed in a perfect spiral pattern. Each stone was roughly the same size, obviously selected and positioned with care. At the center of the spiral was one of Henderson's hunting knives, blade driven deep into the ground. Jenny studied the arrangement for an hour, taking measurements and photos from every angle. "It's communicating," she said finally. "This pattern means something." "What kind of something?" She looked at me with scared eyes. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it wants us to know it can reach us anywhere, even close to human habitation." That night, I dreamed about Vietnam. About tracking an enemy that knew the jungle better than we did, that could appear and disappear like a ghost. In my dream, I was the one being hunted, and something with dark, intelligent eyes was closing in through the underbrush. I woke up knowing that the real hunt was just beginning. The third kill happened at dawn on Friday, and this time, there was a witness. Tommy Pierce, 16 years old and eager to bag his first deer, had been sitting in a tree and since before sunrise when he saw something that would give him nightmares for the rest of his life. It walked out of the forest like a man, he told us, still shaking 3 hours later. But it was huge, covered in fur, moving on 2 legs like it owned the place. The deer didn't even run. They just watched. Jenny and I exchanged glances. We'd spent the past 2 days studying everything we could find about bear behavior, looking for any explanation that made sense. We'd found nothing. Quote underscore 78, underscore. Jenny asked gently. It went straight to Mr. Cooper's bull. That animal weighs maybe 1,500 pounds, mean as a snake, but it just stood there while that thing approached. Then Tommy swallowed hard. Then it reached out with one paw and touched the bull's forehead like it was calming it down. The kill had been identical to the others. Single bite, precise placement, no struggle. But this time, the creature had been seen, and its behavior was even more disturbing than we'd feared. Tommy's description matched what Jenny and I had witnessed, but with troubling additions. The creature had approached the bull deliberately, almost ceremonially. After the kill, it had arranged the bull's legs in a specific position and placed stones around the head in another spiral pattern. It's not just hunting, Jenny said as we examined the scene. It's performing some kind of ritual. The thought made my skin crawl. Ritual meant religion, and religion meant a sophisticated mind capable of abstract thought. We weren't dealing with an animal anymore, no matter what it looked like. That afternoon, I hiked back to the shelter by the creek, hoping to learn more about our creature's habits. What I found there changed everything. The shelter had been expanded, new walls, better construction, and inside a workshop that would have impressed any craftsman. The stolen knives had been used to carve tools from bone and wood, arrowheads, spear points, even what looked like primitive axe heads, all showing skill and planning far beyond any animal's capability. But the most disturbing discovery was a collection of photographs. They were surveillance photos of the local area, obviously taken over weeks or months. Pictures of Henderson's farm, Cooper's ranch, even shots of the ranger station where I worked. Some showed me going about my daily routine, unaware I was being watched. At the bottom of the pile was a photo that made my blood run cold. It showed my daughter Sarah, taken last weekend during our trip to the creek. She was skipping stones while I checked the water quality downstream, completely unprotected. The creature knew about Sarah. It had been watching us, learning our patterns, maybe deciding whether she was a threat or an opportunity. I radioed Jenny immediately. We need to end this tonight. Marcus, we don't even know what we're dealing with. It could be a mutated bear, some kind of hybrid, maybe even. It has pictures of my daughter, Jenny. It's been stalking her. The silence on the radio stretched for a long time. When Jenny finally responded, her voice was grim. What do you want to do? We spent the rest of the day preparing. Jenny brought tranquilizer guns loaded with enough sedative to drop a horse. I cleaned my rifle and loaded it with 180-grain bullets that could punch through a car engine. We also brought flares, spotlights, and enough rope to secure something the size of a small truck. As the sun set, we took positions near the creek shelter. The plan was simple. Wait for the creature to return. Tranquilize it if possible. Kill it if necessary. We couldn't let something that dangerous continue to operate so close to human settlements. But the creature had learned to expect us. Around midnight, we heard movement in the forest, but it came from the wrong direction. Something large was circling our position, staying just outside the range of our lights. Occasionally, we'd catch a glimpse of reflecting eyes, but never long enough for a clear shot. Then, the sound started. Low, rumbling calls echoed through the darkness, coming from different directions. At first, I thought it was just our creature, but the timing was wrong. The calls were being answered from multiple locations around us. "There's more than one," Jenny whispered. The realization hit me like a physical blow. We'd been assuming we were dealing with a single rogue animal, but these coordinated calls suggested a pack, maybe a family group that had learned to work together. The first attack came from behind us. Something crashed through the underbrush and hit our equipment cache with the force of a small truck. Batteries scattered, radio equipment shattered, and our spare ammunition disappeared into the darkness. I spun around with my rifle, but saw nothing except overturned gear. _79. Quote, "They're testing us," Jenny said, her voice tight with fear, seeing how we react. The second attack was more direct. A creature not quite the same as the one we'd seen before, smaller but just as intelligent, stepped into our light circle from the downstream side. It stood upright, maybe 7 feet tall, and held one of our stolen hunting knives in its right paw. Jenny fired first, the tranquilizer gun making a soft popping sound. The dart hit center mass. But the creature just looked down at it curiously, then pulled it out and tossed it aside like a mosquito bite. "The dosage was calculated for normal bear metabolism," Jenny said desperately. "If their biology is different..." I brought my rifle up, but before I could fire, the creature spoke. Not words exactly, but sounds that carried clear meaning. A rumbling communication that seemed to say stop or wait or listen. The tone was almost human, intelligent, and purposeful. For a moment, the three of us stood frozen in a triangle of tension. The creature with the knife, Jenny with her tranquilizer gun, me with my rifle trained on its center mass. One wrong move, and someone was going to die. Then from somewhere in the darkness behind the creature came another voice, deeper, more authoritative. The sound carried the weight of command. And our creature immediately lowered the knife and stepped back. Something much larger emerged from the shadows. This was the Alpha, the one we'd seen at the shelter, 8 feet tall and massively built, but moving with the fluid grace of a predator in perfect control. Its dark eyes fixed on mine, and I felt that same calculating intelligence I'd encountered before. When it spoke, the sounds were more complex, almost like a crude language. And somehow, impossibly, I thought I understood some of it. It was asking why we were there, why we were threatening its territory, what we wanted. "We can't let you keep killing livestock," I said, knowing how crazy it sounded to talk to a bear. "People depend on those animals." The creature tilted its massive head, considering my words. Then it made a series of sounds that felt like laughter. But not the kind that suggested amusement. It was the laughter of something that found human concerns irrelevant. When it stepped forward, I knew our time for talking was over. The Alpha creature moved toward me with terrifying purpose. But just as I tightened my finger on the trigger, Jenny grabbed my arm. "Wait!" she shouted. "Look at its hands!" I glanced down and saw what had caught her attention. The creature's front paws weren't just showing opposable thumbs anymore. They were transforming as we watched, bones reshaping, pads elongating into something that looked disturbingly human. "It's changing. Real-time evolution. Or something else entirely. Help me. Can't control it." Jenny stepped forward slowly, her scientific curiosity overriding fear. "What happened to you, James? What kind of treatment were you using?" Whitmore made a sound of frustration and began drawing in the dirt with one massive claw. Crude symbols that looked like chemical formulas, then sketches that showed a human figure changing into something else. "Experimental gene therapy," Jenny translated as she watched. Something designed to enhance immune response by incorporating animal characteristics. But it went wrong. The smaller creature that had been with Whitmore moved closer, and I saw the same human intelligence in its eyes. Another victim, another researcher who'd been transformed by whatever Whitmore had been working on. "How many of you are there?" I asked. Whitmore held up his partially human hand. Fingers spled. 5 of them, all trapped between human consciousness and bare physiology, all driven by instincts they couldn't fully control. "The livestock killings," Jenny said. "You're still trying to act human. But the bear nature is too strong during certain times." Whitmore nodded miserably. He began drawing again, showing phases of the moon, indicating that the transformations and loss of control were cyclical. During the new moon, they could think clearly, almost manage human speech. But as it waxed toward full, the animal nature took over completely. "Tomorrow night is the full moon. I realized that's why you came to us now while you can still think. What happened next changed everything." Whitmore reached into the thick fur around his neck and pulled out a small waterproof container. Inside were pages covered with detailed notes in shaky handwriting, his research journals documenting the entire transformation process. The treatment had been designed to give cancer patients the regenerative abilities of bears. Whitmore had tested it on himself first, watched it work beyond his wildest hopes. His cancer was cured. His body stronger than it had ever been. But the treatment had incorporated more bear DNA than he'd expected. With each passing month, more of his human genetics were being overwritten. Soon, he'd lose the ability to think in human terms altogether. He and his colleagues would become true animals, but with the hunting intelligence they'd retained from their human lives. "We're dangerous, __, quote _87 __ tomorrow night. Can't stop ourselves." Jenny was reading through his notes frantically. There might be a way to reverse it. His original formulation included a neutralizing agent, but it was never tested. The window is closing, though. Once the transformation reaches a certain point, it becomes permanent. Whitmore nodded and pointed to himself, then to his companions in the shadows. They were all close to the permanent threshold. This might be their last chance to choose what they became. "The neutralizing agent is at your old lab," Jenny continued. "But the dosage would have to be exact, and someone would need to administer it during the peak transformation tomorrow night, when the bear DNA is most active." I understood what she was asking. Someone would have to get close enough to inject a potentially lethal dose into 5 creatures that would be in the grip of uncontrollable animal fury. "There's something else. __, quote _89 __ Marcus. They're losing it," she whispered as one of the smaller creatures began pacing restlessly around our equipment. Whitmore was fighting the transformation hardest, but even he was slipping. His eyes were losing their human awareness, becoming the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up potential prey. When the moment came, everything went wrong at once. The largest of Whitmore's colleagues, a woman who'd been his research partner before the transformation, suddenly charged our position. 800 pounds of muscle and claws moving faster than anything that size had a right to move. I fired my rifle, aiming for her shoulder, hoping to slow her down without killing her. The bullet spun her around, but didn't drop her. She came again, roaring with rage and pain. Jenny managed to inject her with the neutralizing agent mid-charge, but we had no way to know if it would work in time. The creature hit me like a freight train, driving us both to the ground. For 30 seconds, we wrestled in the dirt while I tried to keep her massive jaws away from my throat. Her breath was hot and rank, her strength beyond anything human. Just when I thought she'd tear my head off, she suddenly went limp. The transformation was reversing. Fur receded, bone structure shifted, and within minutes, I was holding an unconscious woman in torn clothing instead of a monster. "It works!" Jenny shouted. But her celebration was premature. The other three creatures had scattered when the fight started. Only Whitmore remained, and he was fully animal now, stalking us with the patient hunger of a predator that knew it had trapped its prey. I raised my rifle, but couldn't bring myself to fire. Somewhere inside that massive bear was still the man who trusted us to help him. "James," I called. "Doctor." "Whitmore, I know you're in there. Let us help you." The creature paused, tilting its enormous head. For just a moment, I saw a flicker of human recognition in those dark eyes. That moment of hesitation was enough. Jenny darted forward and drove the syringe deep into his shoulder. Whitmore roared and spun toward her, but I tackled him before he could strike. We went down hard, rolling through the underbrush while the neutralizing agent fought against months of genetic chaos in his system. Gradually, his struggles weakened. The massive frame began to shrink. The fur receded. When it was over, I was holding a middle-aged man who weighed maybe 160 pounds, unconscious, but breathing steadily. Jenny checked his pulse and nodded. "Vitals are stabilizing. I think we got him in time." We found the other three creatures over the next 2 hours. The treatment worked on all of them, though one, a young graduate student, would never fully recover his speech. By sunrise, we had 5 confused, traumatized humans who remembered very little about their time as bear-human hybrids. Whitmore was the most coherent, and he helped us destroy all evidence of his research. "No one can ever know what we discovered," he said, as we burned his notes. "The temptation to weaponize this would be too great." I agreed completely. We'd seen what happened when human intelligence was combined with predator instincts. It created something more dangerous than either species alone. We reported the incident as a successful hunt for a rogue bear pack. The livestock killing stopped. The farmers were satisfied, and life in Jefferson National Forest returned to normal. Whitmore and his colleagues were relocated with new identities. The official story was that they'd been found suffering from exposure and memory loss after being lost in the wilderness for 2 years. I never saw any of them again, but sometimes I wondered if the treatment had really been complete. On quiet nights in the forest, I'd find myself listening for sounds that might be more than animal, watching for tracks that showed too much intelligence. 3 months later, I requested a transfer to fire lookout duty. I told my supervisor I needed the solitude, the peace of watching for smoke from a tower above the treeine. What I didn't tell him was that I could no longer sleep comfortably in the deep woods. I'd learned that the line between human and animal was thinner than anyone imagined. And some nights, when the moon was full and the forest was quiet, I wondered which side of that line I really belonged on. The mountains still call to me even now, but I answer from a distance, always watching. Always remembering the eyes of something that was once human and might be. Again, some transformations I learned leave marks that never fully heal. My name is Dorothy Silverstone, and I've been a backcountry ranger in Cherokee National Forest for 13 years. People call me Dot. Most folks think being a ranger means sitting in a tower watching for fires, but winter duty is different. When blizzards hit these mountains, I'm the one who goes out to find people who got caught in the storm. I learned mountain rescue on the ski slopes in Colorado before I came to Tennessee. Back then, I was trying to prove a woman could do anything a man could do. Still am, I guess. Being the first female backcountry ranger here means every mistake gets noticed twice as much. That February morning started like any other winter day. Janet made coffee while I checked my gear. We'd been together 3 years, but nobody at work knew that. 1973 wasn't a good time to be open about loving another woman, especially not in a job where men already questioned if I belonged. "Radio says the storm's getting worse," Janet said, handing me the steaming cup. Snow was already falling hard outside our cabin. I kissed her cheek. Just another Tuesday in the mountains. The call came in around noon. 2 hikers hadn't returned from a 3-day trip up Rand Mountain. Newlyweds from Atlanta who thought February was a good time for a romantic getaway. The storm had turned into a full blizzard overnight, with winds hitting 60 miles per hour and temperatures dropping to 15 below zero. My supervisor, Bill Henderson, was a decent guy who'd given me a chance when others wouldn't. "You sure you want to take this one alone?" We could wait for the storm to pass. "Those kids are freezing out there right now," I said, loading my rescue pack. "Every hour we wait makes it worse." He nodded. Bill understood that waiting meant death in these conditions. I strapped on my snowshoes at the trailhead. The wind was so strong I could barely stand up. Snow blew sideways, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. My compass should have pointed north toward Rand Mountain, but the needle kept spinning in circles. "Must be the storm," I muttered, though I'd never seen weather mess with a compass before. The trail disappeared under 3 feet of fresh snow. I followed my memory and the slope of the land, using my ice axe to probe for hidden rocks and roots. The wind made a sound I'd never heard before, like voices singing in a language I didn't recognize. After 2 hours of climbing, I found their first piece of gear, a blue backpack half buried in snow. But something was wrong. The pack was standing upright, perfectly positioned like someone had placed it there. Around it, smaller items were arranged in a perfect circle. A water bottle here, a pair of gloves there, all evenly spaced. No lost hiker arranges their gear in patterns. People in trouble drop things and keep moving. I picked up the backpack and checked inside. Everything was still there. Food, extra clothes, even their camera. Why would they abandon a pack full of survival gear in a blizzard? The wind picked up again, and I swear I heard singing. Not the kind of sound wind makes through trees, but actual voices. Multiple people singing together in harmony, though I couldn't see anyone through the blowing snow. My radio crackled. I tried to call base camp, but all I got was static mixed with something that sounded like drumming. That's when I noticed the snow falling upward. Just for a moment, in a small area about 10 feet wide, snowflakes were rising instead of falling. They moved in a spiral pattern, climbing toward the sky like they were being pulled by invisible strings. I blinked hard and looked again. The snow was falling normally. Too much wind, I told myself, playing tricks with the flakes, but my hands were shaking and it wasn't from the cold. I kept climbing toward where the hikers should have made camp. The singing got louder. Sometimes it sounded close, like someone was walking right behind me. Other times it seemed to come from inside the storm itself, as if the blizzard was singing. My GPS unit showed something impossible. According to the screen, I was standing in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, 500 miles from shore. I turned it off and back on. Same reading. "Come on," I muttered, smacking the side of the device. Electronics don't work well in extreme cold, but I'd never seen one fail this completely. The temperature was dropping fast. My breath froze. The moment it left my mouth and ice was forming on my eyelashes. In conditions like this, the human body shuts down in hours. Those newlyweds didn't have much time left. I found their tent about a quarter-mile up the trail. It was set up perfectly. No damage from wind, stakes driven deep into the frozen ground, rainfly properly secured, but it was empty. Their sleeping bags were laid out neat and flat, like they'd never been slept in. Their clothes were folded in tidy piles. Nobody folds their clothes when they're freezing to death in a blizzard. Inside the tent, frost covered everything in strange patterns. Instead of the random ice crystals you normally see, these looked deliberate, like someone had painted designs on the tent walls with water and let them freeze. The patterns looked almost like writing, but in no alphabet I'd ever seen. I backed out of the tent and stood up. That's when I saw the footprints, not the hikers' prints. I'd been following those for the past hour. These were different, smaller, made by someone wearing soft shoes instead of hiking boots. The prints led away from the tent in a straight line toward the ridge, but here's what made my skin crawl. They were perfectly preserved despite the blowing snow. Fresh prints disappear in minutes during a blizzard. These looked like they'd been made in concrete. I followed them up the ridge, fighting against wind that kept trying to knock me down. The singing was getting clearer now. I could pick out different voices. An old woman, a young man, children. They were singing the same song over and over, but I still couldn't understand the words. At the top of the ridge, I found the hikers. They were sitting on a fallen log, holding hands, facing the storm. Their eyes were open, and they were breathing. But they didn't respond when I called their names. Snow had piled up on their shoulders and heads, like they'd been sitting there for hours. "Hey!" I shouted, grabbing the man's shoulder. "Can you hear me?" He turned to look at me with a dreamy smile. "She's so beautiful," he said. "Listen to her sing." The woman nodded. "We're going to dance with her in the snow forever and ever. I'd seen hypothermia before. Advanced cases make people confused and euphoric. But this was different. Their body temperature should have been dangerously low, but their skin felt warm to the touch. "We need to get you down the mountain," I said, trying to pull the man to his feet. He wouldn't budge. Neither would she. They just sat there holding hands, smiling at something I couldn't see. That's when I noticed we weren't alone. There was someone else on the ridge. A woman in a long dress standing about 50 yards away. She seemed unaffected by the wind and snow. Her dress didn't blow around, and snow didn't stick to her hair. She was singing. I squinted through the blowing snow, trying to get a better look. The woman was elderly with long gray hair braided down her back. She wore traditional Cherokee clothing, a long dress with intricate beadwork and a blanket around her shoulders, but her skin had a strange glow to it, like moonlight on water. "Ma'am," I called out, "are you lost?" She stopped singing and looked directly at me. Her eyes were completely white, like cataracts, but somehow I could tell she was seeing me perfectly. She raised one hand and pointed at the hikers. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Ice formed on my jacket so fast I could hear it crackling. The hikers stood up in perfect unison, still holding hands, and began walking toward the woman. "Stop!" I shouted, but they didn't listen. They walked through the deep snow like it was solid ground, their feet not sinking at all. I tried to follow, but with each step the snow got deeper. Soon I was struggling through drifts up to my waist while they walked easily across the surface. The woman in the dress began singing again. This time I understood some of the words, not because I spoke Cherokee, but because somehow the meaning appeared in my mind. "Come home, lost children. Come home to the mountain. Come dance in the snow that never melts." The hikers reached her and took her hands. All three of them began to glow with that same moonlight radiance. Then they turned and walked toward the edge of the ridge where a cliff dropped off into darkness. __quote_96__ screamed, fighting through the snow, but I was too far away. They stepped off the cliff and vanished. I scrambled to the edge and looked down. The cliff face was smooth rock covered in ice. No broken bodies at the bottom, no sign they'd ever existed, but I could still hear them singing somewhere in the storm below. I stood at that cliff edge for 10 minutes, shining my flashlight down into the darkness and calling their names. Nothing. The wind had died down and the only sound was my own breathing. My radio crackled to life. Dot. This is base camp. What's your location? I fumbled for the radio with numb fingers. Bill, I found them. The hikers. But something's wrong up here. Really wrong. What's your status? Are they injured? How do you explain that 2 people walked off a cliff and disappeared? How do you tell your boss that a woman in traditional Cherokee dress made them do it by singing? I need backup. And maybe someone who speaks Cherokee. Static filled the radio for a long moment. Cherokee. Dot. Are you okay? You're not making sense. There's someone else up here. An elderly Cherokee woman. I think she's in trouble too. Negative. Dot. You're the only person on that mountain. GPS shows you're completely alone. I looked around. The ridge was empty now, except for me and the abandoned tent below. The strange footprints were gone, covered by fresh snow. Even the circular arrangement of gear had been scattered by the wind. But I saw her. I saw all 3 of them. Dot. You've been out in severe conditions for 4 hours. Hypothermia can cause hallucinations. I need you to start heading back down immediately. Maybe he was right. Maybe the cold was getting to me. But I knew what I'd seen. I made my way back to the hiker's tent to gather evidence. If they were really gone, I needed to bring back their gear. But when I unzipped the tent door, I found them inside. The young man and woman were in their sleeping bags, zipped up to their chins, eyes closed. They looked peaceful, like they were having pleasant dreams. Quote, 97, quote, I whispered, crawling into the tent. Quote, 98, quote, I reached out to shake the man's shoulder, and my hand went right through him. They were there, but not there, like looking at people through water. I could see them clearly, but when I tried to touch them, there was nothing but cold air. They opened their eyes at the same time and smiled at me. She's coming for you next. Quote, 100, quote, the winter witch. She's been waiting so long for someone like you. Someone who belongs to the mountain. The man added, someone who understands the cold. Their forms began to fade like melting ice. She needs a new guardian. The old ways are dying, but the mountain remembers. What old ways? I asked, but they were gone. The tent was empty except for their gear, which was now covered in that same strange frost writing. I tried to take pictures with their camera, but every photo came out completely white. I grabbed their supplies and started down the mountain. The storm was getting worse, and I was starting to doubt my own sanity. But I'd only made it 100 yards when I heard my name being called. Dorothy, not Dot, like everyone called me. Dorothy pronounced the old way like my grandmother used to say it. I turned around. The Cherokee woman was standing behind me, close enough to touch. Up close, I could see she was beautiful despite her age. Her face was unlined but ancient, like she'd been carved from mountain stone. You're not supposed to be up here in this weather, quote 103, quote, let me help you get to shelter. You built this, you drew the plans. Now you pay. This is thermite, military raw, hot enough to melt steel. I blow this thing and it takes me with it, but it also seals off the main chemical channel. Cuts off your power source. Underscore, quote, underscore 109, underscore, fix it, they said. Then they were gone. The thermite charges were real, but I never had to use them. Whatever had possessed Coal Hollow seemed satisfied with my willingness to die for my mistakes. The next morning, the chemical fog was gone. The streams ran orange instead of black. The Geiger counter showed normal readings. It took me 6 months to get federal Superfund status for Coal Hollow. 6 months of reports and hearings and fighting with bureaucrats who didn't want to spend money on a dead zone. But I had something they couldn't ignore. Rachel's final research combined with my engineering knowledge. Together, they painted a picture of environmental damage that threatened the entire watershed. The cleanup took 5 years. 5 years of my life spent undoing 20 years of destruction. We pulled tons of contaminated soil, neutralized the acid drainage, replanted native vegetation. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But it was a start. My son Jake came to see the finished project last month. He's in college now, studying environmental science. He still doesn't forgive me for what I did, but he understands why I've spent the last 5 years fixing it. "Do you think they're at peace?" he asked, looking out over Coal Hollow. "The place is green now with clean streams and young trees. I thought about the 23 miners and about Rachel and about all the other victims of projects like Blackstone." "I hope so," I said. "But I don't think I'll ever be sure because late at night when the wind blows through the hollow, I sometimes hear machinery running. Not angry anymore, just waiting, watching, making sure I keep my promises. Coal Hollow is clean now, but it remembers. And so do I. Every morning when I wake up, I think about the choices I made as a young engineer. I think about the men who died because I cut corners and the landscapes I helped destroy for profit. I think about Rachel Martinez, who died trying to understand what I'd done wrong. And every day I try to do better. The guilt doesn't go away. Maybe it shouldn't. Maybe that's the price of redemption, carrying the weight of your mistakes forever and using that weight to build something better. I'm 51 now with gray in my beard and permanent stains on my hands from 20 years of soil samples. I'll probably spend the rest of my career cleaning up sites like Coal Hollow, places where men like I used to be traded lives for profit. It's not enough. It'll never be enough. But it's something. And in the quiet moments when the wind carries the sound of healthy streams and growing trees, I think maybe that's all any of us can do. Fix what we can, remember what we can't, and try to make sure the ghosts of our mistakes don't rise again. Coal Hollow is peaceful now. I pray it stays that way.